Have you exercised discipline in building a retirement savings plan? Given today's low interest rate environment, can your savings earn enough income to support you in retirement? Are your savings protected from the insidious effects of inflation and taxes? Hello, my name is Attorney Ramsey Barawi, and welcome to Your Money, Your Life. Today my guest is Kash Ahmed, the president and founder of American Private Wealth, a firm offering comprehensive financial planning and wealth management services to families and institutions across America. American Private Wealth is an independent firm without conflicts, proudly serving only its clients and no one else. Prior to founding American Private Wealth, Mr. Ahmed enjoyed a very successful career as a financial advisor. He was affiliated with a Wall Street-based financial services firm where he was a member of the elite $1 Million Club. Also, Mr. Ahmed is a professor of finance and investments. Kash, welcome to Your Money, Your Life. It's great to have you on the program.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Now let's start with people who are entering retirement. And let's talk a little bit about what adjustments they should make to their portfolios, whether inside or outside of a retirement plan, to go from the accumulation phase of their assets to the income phase.
Well, first of all, anything that I say cannot be considered advice. Any person who's listening or viewing should consult their personal financial planner. Having said that, as people are entering their retirement years, this is obviously a big change in their life. They're going, as you said, from accumulation to perhaps when they're going to be withdrawing. As they approach this, the planning really should have been done maybe about 5 years prior. Because if you've identified that from 5 years from today is when you are going to say, this is it, this is the line in the sand, and I'm retiring, the planning for that should have started way before. Things that you should be considering perhaps is toning down the risk within your liquid assets. The more risk you take, the more potential for gain. However, should you have a loss, and if you've only got 5 years to go before you actually need this money, you really need to be drawing down on that risk. And so the portfolio should have a gradual shift towards more, perhaps a preservation bias, as opposed to a pure growth. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there is one day where you flip a switch and it automatically becomes conservative, because most people's retirements are also going to be decades long, and it's important that you don't run out of your money. So, you know, if today is the day you retire, doesn't mean you shift completely into the income withdrawal phase, and, you know, make sure the portfolio is completely different from what it was the day before.
Let me throw a hypothetical at you, and then give me your thoughts. Let's say we have a husband and wife couple. They're both retirement age. Let's say one's 67, one is 65. Let's say that excluding their principal residence, their home, they have, let's say, $5 million in financial assets. $4 million of those are in the husband's 401k, and then another $1 million sit outside of a retirement account.
Okay.
From where should this couple first draw their money?
You know, without knowing the very specifics, it may make sense to defer the taxes as much as possible. So the $4 million that's in the 401k obviously is going to be taxed when it's withdrawn. Okay. If you have the option of delaying that as much as possible, that's certainly worth looking into. On the flip side, the non-qualified money, which is not in the 401k tax sheltered scenario, it may have a very low cost basis. So, you know, again, you need to consult your tax advisor for that to make sure. It may be, you know, it may make more sense to draw from the taxable accounts and pay the taxes, which may be lower than what you may incur in capital gains. So it really depends on the very specific situation and where they stand and what the cost base. Sometimes people have cost bases that are quite low. And it depends on the tax environment of the day also. Maybe the tax rate on the ordinary income side of it is lower than what you may pay on the capital gain that you have on the non-qualified account.
Very good advice, Kash. Now, we know that interest rates that the banks are paying to the consumers are extremely low. And yet, from what I see anyway, I see a lot of people flocking to the banks to buy CDs, and what they do is they shop interest rates, and they actually start taking on more risk as they go out 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever the case may be. What do you think people ought to be doing? Should they be running to the banks and getting a CD, or should they be looking at alternatives?
Well, part of, I think, the reason a lot of people are doing that is because 2008 is, while it's fading from memory, it's still very recent. A lot of people don't want to go through, having their investment portfolio pull back as much as it did in, broadly in 2008. However, the knee-jerk reaction is to go into something like a CD because, one, it's FDIC insured, which is misleading because, yes, it's FDIC insured, but at the end of the day, what you actually take home may be negative. Right. Because, one, you're not really getting as much because, as you said, the interest rate environment is very low. What you're really trying to, I call it slaying the dragon called inflation. If inflation, and there's various schools of thought on what should be in it and not. If we look at just CPI, which runs between 3% and 4%, and if a CD is paying you 1, if you're lucky, then you have a negative rate of return, and you need to take that into account. On top of that, that 1% that you do make on the CD still has to be taxed, by the way. So you're not really taking home 1%.
Right.
There are definitely alternatives out there. There's more than one way to get the income that you desire, if that's the reason you're buying the CD to begin with. If you're buying the CD because you don't want to lose money, then there's something different at play here.
You said a little bit earlier that if you buy the CD and it has a 1% gross return, that you're actually losing money. As I understand it, you're not really losing money, but you're losing buying power.
Correct.
Right, because of inflation, that dollar is not worth $1 anymore. It's worth something less.
Bingo. So you're losing your purchasing power.
Right.
So everything that you need to buy with the money that's in the CD, if it's going up at a rate, whether it's gasoline in your car or milk, which they're saying could shoot up in price because of the drought in California, if everything that you need to buy with that money is increasing at the rate of about 3%, but the money itself is only going up at the rate of 1, not counting taxes for a minute, yeah, the same amount of money is not going to buy you the same amount of things.
Right.
And therefore you lose your purchasing power.
You mentioned the term risk a little bit earlier. Let's talk about risk for a second. A lot of people seem to feel that if you buy a CD, there is no risk, but it's my view that in fact you have opportunity risk, right? So let's talk about some of the alternative income types of instruments that are out there and their risks.
So you could look at, a CD that pays you 1% that can potentially not lose money, versus buying the equities or stocks of a multinational, food processing company, without naming names, a multinational that's in the food business that produces essentials that we all use every single day, rich or poor. And that company has a history of paying dividends. A lot of these companies are in 3+ range in dividends. Sure, so that stock has the potential to have more volatility, and potentially it can, it doesn't have the FDIC floor under it, but you're actually picking up more income.
Yeah.
And you have to weigh that. There is nothing that does not involve risk. Even buying Uncle Sam's bonds has risk. Yes, technically it's, it's sacred that, to even think that you're not going to get your money back. But the big is the opportunity cost. If you're in a CD, you're not picking up the 3% here, but in a CD, you're really having a negative rate of return and the loss of the purchasing power. So there's many ingredients to this recipe.
As I understand bonds, the face value of the bond is an inverse relationship to the interest rate. So, if you have a move in the interest rate, that's also going to affect the value of the bond, up or down, depending on what the interest rate is doing. So that's the risk with regard to bonds.
Correct.
Let's talk a little bit about stocks, since you mentioned stocks. As you mentioned, stocks can be volatile, but stocks also are beginning to pay more and more handsome dividends. What type of person, well, let me rephrase that. When should a person be considering buying these types of dividend-producing stocks? At age 65 or beyond that, or should they always have an exposure to these types of stocks? What should they be doing?
As you mentioned, I'm a professor, and I always tell my students that investing and finance is an art, not a science. So there's no right and wrong answer, but there are biases and beliefs. My bias has always been on downside protection. One way to accomplish that is, yes, you buy stocks that are inherently more volatile than bonds, but they buffer the volatility by paying you this income stream. As Warren Buffett, an individual that I admire greatly, once said, you know, somebody asked him, when's the best time to buy? And he says, 20 years ago. And he goes, when's the next time to buy? He goes, when you have money, or something to that effect. Equities should never be discarded. They should always constitute a portion of your portfolio, because historically only equities have ever, if you look at from the very first Treasury Secretary going back to the 1700s, and look at every 10-year rolling period, in every single one of those 10-year rolling periods, the only thing that ever beat this thing called inflation is the broader stock market. They should always be a part of your portfolio, because remember, when you retire, your income is gone. Your salary, your commissions, whatever you're making are gone. Now you're actually taking money away. And you know, as my great-grandmother used to say, you know, even if you have an ocean full of money, you're going to run out of it at some point. The only way to make sure you don't run out of it is you also have some growth in it. And in today's environment, the only way really to ensure that is by having equities in your portfolio. Now, the portion that you should have really depends on your personal situation.
In today's low interest rate environment, people need to develop some sort of a livable income stream. I mean, they may have a pension, they have Social Security, but above and beyond that, they need additional income. What is, in your view as a financial planner, how should somebody in this interest rate environment go about creating that additional income stream?
Very good question. There are many ways of doing it. You know, one is the stocks that we talked about that pay dividends. You know, perhaps prior to retirement you were reinvesting and buying additional shares, and post-retirement now you start taking them instead of reinvesting them. But there are other vehicles out there that provide income, that are designed just to provide income. There are vehicles out there that are designed to make sure that you don't outlive the income that they've promised you. So there's more than one way of doing it. Unfortunately, the vast majority of our fellow Americans out there are not knowledgeable about what's on the menu. You know, even when it comes to investing, the vast majority, even high net worth individuals, people who should be sophisticated and knowledgeable, who have access to talent and, you know, great advisors, say, yeah, stocks and bonds. So, I mean, what else is out there? In fact, there's plenty that's out there. And I think, and this is not a plug, I think it's important for somebody to be working with their own personal financial planner. Ideally, somebody who's completely independent. Independents may have access to a lot more tools at their disposal to, you know, to take care of these various needs for somebody's income needs.
One of the instruments that's out there is called the annuity. Can you speak a little bit about, you know, what is an annuity and for whom an annuity is appropriate?
Okay, so an annuity is a financial product. It's always issued by an insurance company. So whenever you see an annuity out there, it will have its, you know, it'll be sponsored by an insurance company. It's essentially a promise. You take a pile of money, and you, in its simplest sense, because annuities come in very, you know, many shades, you hand it over to the insurance company. You shake hands and say, look, when I need to draw income from this, can you make sure I get an income? Yeah, can I get a check every month, every quarter, whatever term you pick, for as long as I live? So that's essentially what an annuity does. Of course, it also depends on the ability of the insurance company to keep that promise. So make sure when you do purchase an annuity, it's from a reputable company that actually is highly rated and actually has the reserves to meet these obligations. But annuities come in different shades. So they come in, you know, variable annuities. There are fixed annuities. There's fixed indexed annuities. It can be a minefield, and not every annuity is, you know, is the same. Some of them exist simply because the insurance company wanted to have a product out there. So you have to do your homework before you purchase an annuity. But they definitely fit. They're not for everybody. It may be not for somebody today. It may be suitable for them, you know, 10 years from today or 15 or whenever. Again, working with a planner who can determine the suitability of what needs to be done at what stage of your life.
Now, someone that parks money into an annuity, and assuming it's a fixed annuity, let's talk about that for a second, they're giving up any right to draw on that money. In other words, if they need the money someday, it's locked up. They don't have access to it, do they?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily.
Please speak to that.
When you switch on your annuity, this is a process called annuitization. That's, in 9 out of 10 cases, you've said, all right, I have no more rights to that money anymore. The insurance company, their actuaries and their analysts in the back have figured out you're going to live approximately to this age, and they make you, an offer of this many dollars every month or every year. And hopefully they will not pay out more than what you've actually given them. But that's called annuitization. That really is the money's gone, and you are just living on that promise. However, you can systematically withdraw from an annuity without annuitizing that, in which case that money still belongs to you.
There's a product out there which is relatively new called the hybrid annuity. Can you speak to what a hybrid annuity is and how it works?
Good question. A hybrid annuity means different things when you're talking about different companies. There may be an annuity out there that has one feature and they call it a hybrid, whereas another company may also have a hybrid annuity that may have none of the features of the first one.
Oh, that's confusing.
So some annuities will have a long-term care benefit, for example, or a long-term care rider, and they may call it a hybrid annuity. But it really depends on which company and which product from that company we're talking about.
Okay, now,
as always, do your homework.
Do all annuities come with an insurance policy?
It is essentially an insurance policy. It's issued by an insurance company.
I mean a life insurance policy.
You mean a death benefit?
I'm sorry, a death benefit.
Death benefit.
I stand corrected.
Most of them, yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah,
and it's important for our viewers to understand that part of the fee that you pay for the annuity goes towards paying for that death benefit.
Correct, and that's why if you are just, make sure you're buying the annuity for the right reasons. A lot of these are missold as you can't lose your money. Your principal is guaranteed, and in many cases it is. However, you're going into a product, and the appeal has been only one part of the product component. You are paying for that death benefit if you don't need life insurance, or if you actually need life insurance, just get a life insurance policy.
Right.
Remember, nothing is free. You have to pay for all of these things.
Of course. How does a consumer go about evaluating the insurance company that's issuing the annuity? I mean, you want to make sure that that company is paying its obligations and is liquid, right?
Correct. So there are many ways of doing that. There are rating agencies that rate insurance companies, so that is public information. You can look that up. If you're working with a planner, that planner can also do the due diligence on your behalf. You can check with the state insurance commissioner's office to see if they have either brought cases against the company or if they have any issues with that company. There are certain jurisdictions that are considered more robust for an insurance company to be registered in and domiciled in. New York, for example, has very good insurance regulations. So if you're looking at it and working with a company that's domiciled in New York, you're probably in good hands. But again, do the due diligence.
Let me go back to my original scenario, which was a husband and wife, 67 and 65, with $5 million in financial assets. Let's say that they are looking at buying an annuity. Should they buy that annuity in the 401k or outside of the retirement account? What's the best place to buy the annuity?
So annuities under our tax laws provide tax deferral. So they, whatever gains you have in them, are not taxed as long as they stay in there. The 401k that you mentioned is a tax-sheltered account. Generally, it makes no sense to have it tax-sheltered. For example, as I walked in here today, you saw me with an umbrella.
Right.
Because it's raining outside. But if I open it up in here, this would make no sense because we have a ceiling above us.
Absolutely.
So having a tax-sheltered product inside of a tax-sheltered account really is redundant. You're paying for the tax shelter of the annuity when you don't really need it.
Right.
So, and the regulators also look at that and they frown upon it. You really have to make a strong case for why an annuity really is necessary. inside of a tax sheltered account.
And that's, of course, where someone like yourself as a financial planner and advisor, that's the role that you play.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now let's talk a little bit about bonds. There are different flavors of bonds. There are municipal bonds, there are corporate bonds, and then of course there are the bonds issued by the federal government. Speak to that and explain some of the risks and differences that are involved in these different flavors of bonds.
Okay, so the ones that are issued by the government are treasury bonds, treasury bills. They're backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. There's also international bonds. There are bonds that are issued by international governments, so sovereign debt. That's backed by the ability to pay by that government. Then you mentioned municipal bonds. These are issued by municipalities, like cities, towns, counties, sometimes by public school systems, public universities to fund various projects. Every bond is different. You can say, all right, I'm always going to get my money back on a U.S. Treasury bond, and that may theoretically be correct. Whereas a municipality, not all municipalities are the same. There may be a bond that's basically a promise to pay you for lending them the money based on the tax revenues of the municipality. Or it could be based on the revenues that they're going to collect from the project that's financing the municipal issuance. So if the bond was issued to build a bridge, and the bridge has a toll, then if they keep collecting the tolls, you should be able to get your interest payments. Then there's general obligation bonds, which may be protected, by legislation, things like that. Each has its own place. Municipal bonds obviously, provide tax favored income. In many cases, you can avoid all taxation on the income part, not the capital gains.
Right.
But you have to do your due diligence. If you live in a state that doesn't have an income tax, then it may not make sense.
Right.
But if you live in, let's say, New York City, and you buy a New York City issued municipal bond, then you may be avoiding New York state tax, city tax, as well as federal tax.
Given the low interest rate environment that we're in today, how important is the duration or the period that the bond goes out, whether 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? How important is that, and what should people be focusing on?
Oh, it's important enough where the regulators actually have come out with alerts, and a lot of folks may be even seeing them on their statements from their financial firms, alerting them to be cognizant of this. Duration measures sensitivity to interest rates. So the longer the duration means any tick up or down in interest rates is going to have an effect on the price of the underlying bond. The longer the duration, the bigger the move. And so it's extremely important when we're sitting in a virtually zero interest rate environment. We know rates are going to go up. They're not going to go negative. Right. Some economists will argue that they can, but in reality, they're going to go up, which means if you have a long duration bond, it's going to fall more in price than a short duration bond. And so you really should be evaluating the duration within your bond portfolio. The vast majority of folks who have fixed income or bond exposure is via bond funds. And so you'll have a blended maturity of what's in it.
To what degree should our hypothetical couple have money parked in a cash account, like a money market, or maybe even a savings account? What percentage of, I talked about 5 million, what percentage of that money should be actually sitting in cash?
Well, cash makes you zero these days, so having too much in cash is also, again, an opportunity cost. But it's also important because cash is liquid, it's readily available. Cash needs to be there for emergencies first and foremost. Having said that, there's rules of thumb. I don't believe in rules of thumb. I think every situation is different. So if you look at this couple and they have a burn rate, they have monthly expenditures that are recurring of X each month, should they fall into an emergency where they have no more income because somebody got laid off or something, they need to make an assessment of, I think in my profession, at my stage in life, it should be 3 months before I can get a job. It should be 6 months. Or if I have a really specialized, background and the demand for what I do maybe is not as robust, maybe I should have more money sitting in cash. So there is no, I don't like to say, it should be 3% or it should be 6 months worth of expenses. It also depends on the risk tolerance. If people are more conservative, then they should have more.
Good place for us to stop. You saved for retirement. You took steps to assure that your financial plan aligns with your personal and retirement goals. You survived the bursting of the real estate bubble, which was a full-blown credit crisis, followed by a steep economic recession. However, today you experience the challenges of tumbling interest rates so low that on an inflation-adjusted basis, you're actually losing buying power. If your retirement plan is based on interest rate assumptions that are no longer valid, it may very well be time to adjust your plan. While each person's financial needs and retirement plans will vary, everyone does need to review their retirement planning in the context of the current economic environment. Adjusting from the accumulation phase to the retirement phase requires a different mindset, fraught with complexities. It is precisely for that reason that one needs to establish clearly defined goals balanced by one's risk tolerance and time horizon. Given today's low interest rate environment, developing a livable income stream can be both challenging and stressful. The key is to stay flexible and develop an effective plan and strategy with a trusted advisor like my guest, Cash Ahmed. Remember, it is better to strategize than to improvise. In closing, thanks to my guest, Cash Ahmed. Cash, thank you. And thank you to you, our viewers, for watching Your Money, Your Life. My name is Attorney Ramsey Barawi, Building Your Trust.